Okay, my friends, I'm here with Flit, Stanley chapter 5. So last we knew he kind of saved the museum from being robbed and they caught the thieves and he became a little bit famous because I'll go back. So he was a little famous because his picture got in the newspaper and he got a medal from the police department. Well, that was the last chapter. This is chapter 5. This is the last chapter in Stanley, too. It's a short book. This is Arthur's Good Idea. Hang on one second. I literally just smeared my glasses and I can't see. Hit them by accident. So, Arthur's Good Idea. So, Arthur is his little brother, right, who's been a little jealous as time went on. So, for a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, Agnes, over there. That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves," and things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and the staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley did not mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came a further change, and it was not a pleasant one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Hello, Super Skinny," they would shout, and even ruder things about the way he looked. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids I mostly mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different. Flat." "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion, or that matter, or the color of their skin." "I know," Stanley said. "Only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps, but they can try," said Mrs. Lambchop. Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and knelt by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're so mad because I let you get tangled the day you were my kite, I guess." "Skip it, will you? I'm not mad. Go away." "Please, let's be friends." Arthur couldn't help crying a little, too. "Oh, Stanley," he said, "please tell me what's wrong." Stanley waited for a long time before he spoke. "The thing is, I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular shape again like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever. It makes me sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet and could think of nothing more to say. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want the folks to worry." He means his parents. "That would only make it worse." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." He took hold of Stanley's hand. The two brothers sat together in the darkness. Being friends. They were both still sad, but each one felt a little better than he had before. This is the thing about your family sometimes, too, is even when you're kind of mad at each other, there's always that love deep down underneath. Even when you're angry, there's always love. Your family always loves you, and they're usually there for you when you really, really need them. And then suddenly, though he had not been trying to think, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and he turned on the light and he ran to the big storage box where toys and things were kept. He began to rummage in the box. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some lead soldiers and model airplane models and lots of wooden blocks, and they said, "Aha!" He had found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. He held it up, and Stanley and he looked at each other. "Okay," Stanley said at last, "but take it easy." He put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and clamped his lips tightly about it so that no air could escape. "I'll go slowly," Arthur said. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand at me." He began to pump. At first, nothing happened, except that Stanley's cheeks bulged a little bit. Arthur watched his hand, but there was no wiggle signal, so he pumped on. Then suddenly Stanley's top half began to swell. "It's working! It's working!" shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so that the air could get around inside of him more easily. He got bigger and bigger. The buttons of his pajama top burst off. Pop, pop, pop! A moment more and he was all rounded out, head and body, arms and legs. But not his right foot. That foot stayed flat. Look at that picture. It's so funny. I love their pajamas, too. Arthur stopped pumping. "It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons," he said. "Maybe a shake would help." Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley Lambchop as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," said Mr. Lambchop. "Up and talking when you ought to be asleep, eh? Shame on—" "George!" said Mrs. Lambchop. "Stanley's round again!" "You're right," said Mr. Lambchop, noticing. "Good for you, Stanley." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them, and then they turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Stanley and Arthur. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon all the Lambchops were asleep. Now, that's the end of the story. So that's the very end of the story. And here's a little thing that you can do, and I can put this in Dojo too for you as a can do. It says, "Send Flat Stanley on a whole new adventure." After Stanley Lambchop is flattened by a bulletin board, he's able to travel through the mail in an envelope and visit his friend in California. Now you can send your own Flat Stanley on a new adventure through the mail. Draw a Flat Stanley, cut him out, and write your name and address on his back. Then begin a journal recording some of your adventures with Stanley. When you're ready, mail Flat Stanley and the journal to a friend. Include a letter asking your friend to add Stanley's new adventures to the journal. Then when Stanley's ready to come home, have your friend return him and the journal to you. Upon his return, you can mark Stanley's travels on a map to keep track of his world travels, and then you can send him out again. And then there is actually a website here, www.flatstanleyproject.com, where you can log on and learn about different people who have sent Flat Stanley through the mail already. The other thing I want to tell you is if you enjoyed Flat Stanley, the book Flat Stanley, you can actually, there are many more Flat Stanley, there's like Flat Stanley Around the World and lots of other Flat Stanley books. So if you enjoy it, then you can actually go online and find more copies of it. Different, not versions of it, but different ones of it. Let me see if it tells in here the other ones that there are. So, oh yeah, here they are. So, Flat Stanley and the Magic Lamp, Stanley in Space, Stanley's Christmas Adventure, Invisible Stanley. So there are many more adventure books. There's probably even more, actually, than that now, because I know they came out with more. So there's more Flat Stanley books, and I think Flat Stanley is cute. So I will put up on Dojo for you under the Can Do. I'll probably leave it in class story about Flat Stanley and the project that you can do with him, so that you have all the information for that in the website. I hope you enjoyed Flat Stanley, and next week we'll do different books. Have a great day, guys. I love you. Bye.